is Erez Bahar. I'm an audit partner at Davidson, and I deal a lot with emerging markets clients that we do often, and so I thought I'd share some insights of what we see in the world today and how we deal with some of these audits where we got to go travel to faraway lands. Before I get to that, I just wanted to go over some interesting recent trends that we're noticing at Davidson Company of sort of what's happening out there in the world. There's certainly a continuous suffering of the junior mining companies. Everybody in the room knows that. Some companies are starting to fall off. We do think this is the year where things are going to start getting in line a little bit. On the healthcare side, we're starting to see some deals there, which is interesting, aging population, and we are seeing signs of a lot of companies coming up with products and technologies that are tailored to the baby boomers and so forth, and some interesting deals are coming there. We're seeing some things on the nutraceutical side, that's supplements. For good or for worse, it seems like the world is going to keep on taking pills, and so interesting things there. Tech is becoming big, but tech is kind of everything, this computer, and so tech is just a lot of things. But there was a time when lots of companies were developing applications. They're still going on there. The wearables is becoming interesting. Chips and GPS devices and just really anything that makes us humans be more efficient. We're seeing some of that. Another interesting field that we're seeing a couple potentials out there is agriculture, and in particularly with the world going into organic food and health conscious, and there's a big fight for land, and particularly in North America. And so there's a big push now for agriculture and then growing anything from food to bananas and so forth, and particularly on the organic side. So those are kind of the 3 or 4 things we're seeing out there, and we thought it'd be interesting to share that in the sense of getting our skill sets up to speed on those types of industries is interesting too. For example, in technology, a lot of companies are starting to capitalize intangible costs, and particularly if you're developing something internally. So, in terms of our world, this town has focused on junior mining for a long time, and there seem to be somewhat of a shift into other industries, which is good and bad, but it's good because it diversifies things. And so internally here, we're looking at sort of, increasing skill sets on different industries, and we encourage the world out there to look at similar things too. So auditing in emerging markets. Emerging markets has been a controversial topic for some time now. The world sees emerging markets as countries outside of North America, outside of Europe, particularly Northern and Western Europe. Certain countries in Central America are not emerging anymore. Clearly countries like Japan are not. But by and large, countries that are in South America and Africa and Eastern Europe are considered emerging, and in Asia as well. And so there's been a lot of issues on the auditing world on how do we audit these companies, because accounting is done differently in these countries. And it isn't our place to say whether or not it's right or wrong, but these are Canadian public companies, and so therefore they need to adhere to the Canadian rules. And what we're seeing a lot of the struggles is the whole concept of reconciling the books and records of the entities in those emerging countries into a consolidated statements under Canadian auditing standards as well as under IFRS. And so those issues keep on coming back. And so what I wanted to share with you today is sort of some of the experiences that we go through when we visit some of these entities, and sort of the struggles that we have and how we get around that. And so hopefully that'll be interesting. And I just gotta make sure how to use this. Oh. Yeah, I'll try that. So what are we required to do? So I'll give a typical scenario. We have maybe a mining company, and it's in a foreign jurisdiction that's considered emerging, and often we pitch the idea that we need to go there. And part of the reason why we say we need to go there, we just want to make sure that the business really exists, and all the equipment and things that you've got there are really there. So I'll start with that, property, plant, and equipment. So you can imagine, Mr. Auditor coming off a plane into Africa, for example, jet lag, and got my khaki pants on and my running shoes and walking into a mine site, and we got to audit this thing. So you got some equipment in there, and you got one back.
No, I don't know. We can go back.
So we show up at this place and we go, oh, wow, you got this big plant over here, and then we go, okay, well, when did you buy it? And give us all the evidence to show that you paid for it and that you've got title to the equipment and so forth. And then, of course, we look at the usual accounting stuff. Did you depreciate it? Did you consider impairment and so forth? But what happens now with mining is that a lot of companies are losing money or don't have enough money to continue their operations. So we look at this big piece of equipment and land and we go, well, what's it worth today? And we know what you paid for it and you know what you amortized it. And then us accountants, we don't know that much about these things, so we sometimes hire evaluators to do some work for us, and then we kind of have to audit the evaluators' assumptions and work. And so that's some of the struggles that we get. And so the comment that we get back is that we need to ensure that there's title and that it exists and that depreciation is taken, and just as importantly, that the valuation is appropriate. And so that's why we show up to these places, just to see it and to take some photos as we did on this one. Another example is turning raw materials into a work in progress. So lots of our clients are operating and they're producing and they're turning raw materials into work in progress. And so part of our reasoning why we go to these jurisdictions is we want to watch it. So we just want to see it happening. And when we see it happening, the actual conversion, then we get a sense that A, it actually happened, and B, us understanding the process by watching enables us to ask the right questions. And that's why we do that. So seeing is believing, and seeing is also enabling us to ask those questions. And then sometimes we count lumber too in emerging markets too. And so again, Mr. Auditor shows up on site and sees all this pile of lumber, and he or she says to himself, well, how do I count this? How do I count this pile? And again, if we don't go there to visit on person, then it's really hard to get a sense of things. I mean, sometimes the comment that we receive back is, why can't you have a local person count it for you, and so forth. And we do that sometimes, but unless we see it ourselves, it's really hard to get a feel for the situation. And there's that lumber again. And then we visit remote operations. And at Davidson Company, we're not shy to jump on a plane. We think that is good for us, and it's good for the clients, and it's good from a risk perspective too. And so we are willing to go to all places in the world. And it's a recent example in Asia too. And we'll stay in different places too. And the idea to kind of show this is to kind of give you the flavor of what we go through when we show up at these places, because we're no geologists and we're not as used to it as some people in this room could be. But we're willing to. And then one thing we really want to communicate to all the clients is we like to stick to our budget by sharing the same room. So what we'll do is we'll put up a couple people in the same room, and they'll share the room if they need to. In this case, it was a little bit different, but we want you to know that we're trying to stick to the budget by cutting costs and sharing rooms as well together. And we like to dress like the locals too, because when you go to a place and you dress differently or you talk a little differently, we like to think that we like to respect the local people and adhere to their rules and custom. And so every once in a while, we'll put on the same shirt as the person who's there as well. So in this case, we just decided to get a similar shirt, and that's how we show up in some of these places too. And so, this concept of emerging markets. Oh yeah, and lastly, here's often what we get. So we arrive in South America and we go to the company. Well, here's your trial balance and here's your general ledger, and we're going to pick some samples today. So, we want to see your accounting records. Okay, Mr. Auditor, here are our accounting records. Go have fun. Go enjoy yourself. And then we go, well, for us to go through all this is going to be quite troublesome, and it's going to take us quite a bit of time to do that. So could you help us out? And then there's language barriers and so forth. And so those are kind of some of the things that we get when we get there. And of course, in some of these spots, depending on the country and depending on jurisdiction, we do have obstacles. Sometimes we have barriers, and in this particular case in South America, we didn't really know how we're going to get past the sheep, right? So, you stand there and there's a large, so we have to deal with physical hurdles as well, not just accounting and auditing. So the communication is that, us auditors, we try to put on a hat of a brave face when we audit these things. And so lastly, of course, we like to roll up our sleeves too. I mean, most of the time we're stuck in a suit and tie and behind our cubicles and we're crunching up numbers, but every once in a while we like to get our hands dirty. And I don't think, you can't really see Pete that well, and I didn't really tell him I was going to take his picture either, but you could see him with yellow boots there hanging out. And so there's your friendly auditor over there doing a local inspection. And that's really the big thing, is reconciling the accounting records from that jurisdiction to Canadian auditing standards and to IFRS. There's been lots of problems in emerging markets and things that have come out, but there also are interesting signs out there. There's a runoff in Argentina for election, and there might be some potential there changing. I read something the other day that maybe somebody can share it with me, but Ecuador supposedly is opening up its doors again and looking for $1 billion foreign investments. The US dollar is strong, and so if you have commodities in a jurisdiction where your currency devalued against the US dollar, there is some opportunity there because you gain on the exchange and so forth. And so that's kind of what we're seeing out there. And lastly, we like to put our name out there. And so usually when we go on these trips, we like to take a photo or two showing our brand name as well. The other things that are happening in emerging markets too, of course, is that money is dry, but regulation is still tight. And so there's a bit of a challenge right now in trying to accomplish this, because when we audit emerging markets now, we're going beyond the numbers. We're looking way beyond auditing your cash and your accounts receivable and your prepaids. Now our expectation is that we start auditing real risk. And real risk means performing different types of procedures than what you're used to. And some of it is almost forensic related, but the concept is that the expectation that if you're going to continue doing business in one of these jurisdictions, that you should expect your accounting and auditing to remain relatively complex.